I'll be the first to admit, when Cade went out, I thought they was going to fall off like no limit. Instead, the Pistons stayed down like 4 flats on the Cadillac because of their identity.
Let me paint you a picture. You're a defensive coordinator in the NBA playoffs. You've spent the entire week preparing your game plan. You've watched hours of film. You've drawn up your rotations. You've identified your mismatches. And then you realize something that keeps you up at night. You don't just have to stop Cade Cunningham. You have to stop a team that already proved it can beat you without him. There's no good answer. There's no clean solution. And the Detroit Pistons, the team everyone spent the last month counting out, are about to make every single contender in the Eastern Conference pay for that mistake. Nobody is ready for what Cade Cunningham is about to do. To understand why this moment is so dangerous, you have to rewind to March 19th. The Detroit Pistons are rolling, best record in the Eastern Conference. Cade Cunningham is playing the best basketball of his life. The league is finally starting to treat Detroit like a real contender. And then it happens. A collision with Wizards guard Trey Johnson. A collapsed lung. Cade Cunningham, the heart of everything the Detroit Pistons do, is out indefinitely. The reaction across the NBA was immediate and unanimous. Detroit was done. The #1 seed was gone. Without their franchise player, without their offensive engine, without the guy who controls every single possession, the Pistons were going to collapse. The Celtics would overtake them. The Knicks would surge. Everything they built was about to unravel. That was the narrative, and it was completely, embarrassingly wrong. Because while the entire NBA was busy writing Detroit's obituary, the Pistons were out there dismantling everyone else's playoff hopes instead. Let's talk about what Detroit actually did without Cade Cunningham, because this is the part that should genuinely frighten every team left in these playoffs. The Pistons went 8-3 without their franchise player, and these weren't wins against bottom feeders or tanking teams padding their record. These were statement wins against legitimate contenders. They snapped the Lakers' 9-game win streak, a Lakers team with Luka Doncic playing some of the best basketball of his life. They blew out Minnesota, they handled Toronto, and they clinched the #1 seed in the Eastern Conference by beating Philadelphia. 8-3, without Cade. And over the full course of the season, Detroit went 13-5 in games without Cunningham. Let that sink in. Nearly a 70% win rate without their best player. That's not a fluke. That's not luck. That's a roster built with genuine depth and a defensive identity so strong that it doesn't require any one player to function. Here's how they did it. Defense first. Always defense first. Without Cade's steadying presence on offense, Detroit leaned fully into what makes them elite on the other end of the floor. Second in defensive rating. First in steals. First in forced turnovers. They dictate tempo, they control the paint, they make every possession feel uncomfortable. Rotation sharper, communication louder, physicality through the roof. And then on offense, instead of running everything through one player, they spread the ball. More movement, more sharing, less isolation, more players involved in creating. And somehow, in games without Cade, the Pistons were actually averaging more assists per game. The offense became less predictable, less stoppable, and their field goal percentage actually went up without their primary creator on the floor. This stretch wasn't just survival, it was growth. The Pistons learned how to win in a completely different way. And that lesson, that ability to function without being dependent on one player, is exactly the kind of thing that makes a team dangerous in a 7-game series. But every team needs players who rise when the lights get brighter, and Detroit found 2 of them in the span of 3 weeks. First, Dennis Jenkins. If you don't know that name yet, you're about to. Jenkins is an undrafted guard out of St. John's, a two-way player who spent time in the G League, a guy who was ineligible for last year's playoffs and had to watch the Pistons vs. Knicks series from his couch. He started this season fighting just to stay in the rotation, and then Cade went down, and Jenkins stepped into the starting lineup. And what happened next was one of the best individual stretches by an undrafted player this NBA season. In 19 starts this year, Jenkins averaged 17.2 points, 7.4 assists, and 3.6 rebounds. The Pistons went 14-5 with him as the starting point guard.
Dennis Jenkins lost the dribble, goes back to get it, takes it to the rim, flips it up and in!
But the moment that announced him to the entire league came against the Lakers. With the game on the line, Jenkins dropped a career-high 30 points, including 6 points in the final 34 seconds. A smooth step back followed by a confident mid-range jumper to put Detroit ahead and seal the win against one of the hottest teams in the West. His teammates were so fired up that Tobias Harris had to push him to start talking trash on the court, because Jenkins could back every single word of it up. He's not a fill-in anymore, he's a weapon. And in the playoffs, when teams trap Cade and force the ball out of his hands, Jenkins becomes the release valve that defenses simply aren't prepared for. And then there's Jalen Duren. Duren was already having a career year before Cade went down. averaging 19.5 points and 10.6 rebounds on an absurd 64.5% from the field, one of the most efficient big men in the entire NBA. But the question everyone kept asking was whether he could be a true number 2 option on a championship-level team. Cade's injury gave him the chance to answer that question directly, and he answered it emphatically. In the 10 games without Cunningham, Duren averaged 23.8 points, 10.6 rebounds, and 3.1 assists. He scored 20 or more points in more games than he didn't. He was an absolute force, using old-school physicality, strength, and fundamentals to make every opposing big man look ordinary. And here's the thing, he did it without Cade creating for him. He did it on his own.
Back out to Duncan Robinson, splits his defenders, dump off to Jalen Duren, and Duren.
At this point, it's fair to say Duren has proven he can be a legitimate number 2 scoring option on a contender. And with the postseason here, there is no reason to think this stops now. Detroit entered the season with one all-star caliber player. They're entering the playoffs with a star, a breakout big, and a fearless young bunch. And then Cade Cunningham came back. All eyes were on his return game against Milwaukee. Would there be rust? Would the collapsed lung affect his conditioning? Would there be any hesitation? The answer was emphatic. Cunningham finished with 13 points, 10 assists, and 5 rebounds on 6 of 11 shooting. His vision was still elite. His drives were still decisive. There were no visible signs of fatigue. And most importantly, in 26 minutes on the floor, Detroit dominated. Cade was a plus 12, right in line with his season average.
A.J. Green with a miss. Pistons go deep to Cade, off the glass and good.
But the part that should genuinely scare the rest of the Eastern Conference wasn't the box score. It was what Cade said after the game. Stars returning from injuries usually talk about rust, about finding their rhythm, about getting their conditioning back. Cade didn't say any of that. Speaking to the media for the first time in weeks, he said, "I felt really good. I felt like I got some really good cardio in today. Everything felt good. I felt like all the training and stuff I've been doing had me in a great place where I was comfortable for all of my minutes." He's not talking about catching up. He's talking about being ready. He's not behind. He's been preparing this entire time. And now he comes back with something no star player ever has heading into the playoffs: fresh legs. While every other franchise player in the East has been grinding through 70-plus games, Cade Cunningham has been resting, training, and building himself back up to full strength. He'll hit the playoffs fresher than anyone on the floor, and he already averages 24.5 points, 5.6 rebounds, and 9.9 assists per game on a plus 10.5 margin when he's on the court.
7. Cade will get it back, go behind the back, step back, and long gun. It goes! Hello.
When Cade Cunningham plays, the Detroit Pistons are one of the most dominant teams in basketball. So let's zoom out and look at what we're actually dealing with here. The Detroit Pistons finished with the best record in the Eastern Conference. Just 2 years ago, this franchise lost 28 games in a row. They were the laughingstock of the NBA. No direction, no hope. Now they're the number 1 seed. Now they have home court advantage through the entire Eastern Conference playoffs. Their defense is a nightmare. Second in defensive rating. First in steals. First in forced turnovers. Ausar Thompson, who earned his second Defensive Player of the Month award in March, leads the league in steals and deflections and is making a strong case for all defensive first-team honors.
Is the one they're leaving open. Misses from the free throw line with a basket.
Isaiah Stewart is back healthy. Their defensive identity is fully intact. Their offense is now three-dimensional in a way nobody predicted. Cade controls everything when he's on the floor. Duren is an unstoppable force inside. Jenkins is the wild card that no defense prepares for. And every team in the East now has to game plan for all three simultaneously. And perhaps most importantly, this team has been tested in a way most playoff teams never are. They lost their franchise player for 3 weeks at the worst possible moment and didn't just survive, they grew. They figured out who they are without their best player. That's structural resilience. That's what championship teams are made of. Just 2 seasons ago, the Detroit Pistons were a punchline. Now they're the team everyone in the Eastern Conference is quietly most afraid to see in the second round. They have a franchise star coming back with fresh legs and something to prove. They have a breakout big who just answered every question about whether he belongs. They have an undrafted guard who already has a signature playoff caliber performance under his belt. And they have a defensive identity so hardened that they went 13-5 without their best player. The NBA spent a month counting Detroit out. The Pistons spent that same month becoming something nobody saw coming. Nobody was ready for this version of the Detroit Pistons. And if you think Cade Cunningham is going to walk into these playoffs playing it safe, playing like a guy who just came back from a collapsed lung, you don't know Cade. Drop a comment below. How far do you think the Pistons go? Will Cade Cunningham put the league on notice? Hit the like button and subscribe because this playoff run is going to be fun.